Hi everyone, I'm Grandmaster Magesh Panchanathan. This is Kings and Queens Chess Academy's YouTube channel. Today we're going to be continuing on the Paul Morphy game series. We already have a few videos with his amazing games. Today we're going to continue on Paul Morphy against the King's Gambit. In our last video, we saw how he used the King's Gambit as white. Today we're going to see a great example in which he played against the King's Gambit and destroyed it. This is actually one of my personal favorites. This is a game that I really love because I played this opening quite a bit when I was young. And let's jump into the game right now. So this was played in 1858. John Schulten was playing white and Paul Morphy is playing black. And as you can see, after e4, e5, f4 was played. The King's Gambit. And a quick refresher is King's Gambit is actually a very dangerous opening. What it does, it actually exposes the king quite a bit for white himself, right? The king is open in that diagonal, but the f pawn gives a lot of chances to attack. It actually opens up this square for the e pawn to go up, gives a chance to get the center on d4. Most importantly, it opens the f file. When the rook gets to the f file, that really gives a chance for white to attack along the f file. So King's Gambit is quite dangerous. Now, Paul Morphy decides to play a counter gambit. So he doesn't accept f4. Instead, he goes pawn to d5. He says, you know what? I'm not going to take your pawn. Instead, I'm going to offer a counter gambit for white. So what is this gambit? I mean, not yet. I guess at this point, everything looks like a trade. Pawn captures d5 is the most obvious move. But very quickly, I want to show you this is a big mistake. If you want to take a quick pause and try to find out the best move for black. Okay, hopefully you figured it out. We sometimes call it as the lightning attack. One of my friends showed this to me and told me how this looks. You will see that in a second. That is queen goes to h4 for a check. And I'm hitting both this one and this one. And the only difference usually for this is g3 because you've already moved your f pawn. And that allows me to go to e4, creating another double attack. And usually when you block with the queen or whatever it is, I end up taking the rook. And promptly, this is called we call it the lightning attack because the queen in one swift motion can go all the way to h1 in a continuous move after move. The queen moves and then gets there. So it's a cool thing to look on its own, but right now let's not go too much into it. We know f takes e5 is a mistake because of queen h4 check. So the correct move was e takes d5 and that was played in the game. And now black could of course take back on f4 and that would make things even, but instead black Morphy chooses to go e4. This is where the gambit begins, right? So now black is saying, I have given up a pawn, I'm not taking it back. So that pawn on d5 can be safe. You can protect it if you want to. But I'm just going to play for my advantage here, right? So black says e4 pawn is my advantage. So it's very rare that black actually initiates a gambit. And it makes logical sense. If you are playing white, you're actually one move ahead. Giving up a pawn for controlling the center or taking more of an attacking position makes much more sense. But if you're playing black, you're already one move behind. So giving up a pawn will only neutralize the initiative and you will be still down a pawn. So usually gambits are not that great for black. And that's the reason why you will see a lot of gambits played from white side, not from black side. But here, Morphy is offering this gambit. Let's see how this goes. Knight c3, knight f6. And white plays d3. I think the most logical move because this is the strong pawn and white wants to break it and make sense, yeah? And Morphy again does not want to simplify because pawn takes d3, bishop takes d3, and you know things get simplified more. Morphy plays bishop to b4 to his true nature, developing one piece at a time and doing something kind of important with it, yeah? We set up a pin here. Bishop to d2 was played. Again, pawn takes e4 is possible, but I'll take back with a knight, hitting on the pinned piece multiple times. Again, the pin is going to come in handy. But instead, Schulten played bishop to d2. This is probably a starting point of this game where it gets really interesting and nice. Now, the nature of the game says that Morphy is down a pawn and he needs to either try to force things quickly or try to regain the pawn. Now, both are kind of possible. For example, this pawn can be captured, given that this could also take this, or I simply have two attackers, so I could just try to capture this pawn back. And I could just trade this one off with d3. That will put us back on level ground because black sacrificed the pawn, now gets it back. But You can also continue to say, I will play for initiative. I will not take the pawn back. Instead, I will continue to develop and do things faster. That is the nature of a game usually for a gambit. Most of the gambits continue in that nature. At some point, of course, they can always collect the material back and go back to a regular position. But Morphy was in no mood to do that. So the next move he played is actually quite interesting. He sacrificed a pawn yet again. I wouldn't say second pawn because this is still ours to take. So this is where I would say Morphy is actually sacrificing the main pawn. Now it's a point of no return. I don't think he can get the pawn back. He needs to fight back with initiative. And e3 is a beautiful move here. Bishop takes e3 and castles. Again, he doesn't care about winning the pawn back right away. He's all about regrouping his pieces and getting them together. We have seen that in other videos too. So now castle, of course, leaves this file open for the black pieces to attack the white king. Bishop goes back to d2, covering for the pin. I think at this point, there are lots of interesting moves, but Morphy goes with very, very precise play here. I really like what he does. He plays bishop takes e3, bishop takes e3. Pawn takes. Bishop could have also captured back, but when the knight captures, this pawn and the bishop will kind of be under attack. It's possible, but I don't want to go off on a tangent there. Let's look at the game because I think that in itself is pretty beautiful. After b takes e3, rook e8 check, bishop e2. Now again, one side is completely developed. I think white is still not in great place with the king being in the center, but black's pieces are not out yet, right? Let me actually make them on red. This is not Morphy's style, yeah? Is it? Okay, so let's see what he does. Bishop to g4. Just like in most other games, he always brings his pieces out in a coordinated way. Bishop g4 hits this bishop, adds to that pin. Don't just bring the pieces out, bring them with a sense of purpose, right? That's what we've been seeing throughout this series. White plays c4, guarding that pawn on d5, maybe a little bit greedy, but again, at this point, if I was white, I would have been super worried about what's going on. C4 does make sense in some sense. You don't want knight joining into the attack. So he wants to protect the pawn, but I would be more worried about getting this king out of here. So if I'm playing white, that's my number one goal. I wouldn't be worried about this pawn. How do I castle? How do I get out of this trouble as soon as possible? Maybe king f1 right away is something that I should consider. After c4. Again, I would say you can quickly try to guess what Morphy played here. I love his move. He could go for a lot of attack. He could try to bring a lot of pieces. But guess what? He thinks about the piece that's not yet out. And he wants to bring it to the best square, not any square. So he plays c6. And he says, you know what? I'm just going to pick up the pawn back, the pawn that I gave. So that would make it really bad for white. So white's almost forced to capture this pawn. And after knight c6, now we have a fantastic piece play for black. This knight is also going to go to d4. So for one pawn, you should know at this point that white is way, way ahead of, black is way ahead of development and enough compensation to take care of that one pawn. So let's see what happens. King f1, and white is deciding to just get out of the pin because knight f3 at any point will be met with bishop takes f3, pawn takes f3, and look at how bad these pawns are. And that makes it a lot more difficult. And moving the queen out of the way to castle is almost impossible. And let's say I play a move like c3 to stop knight to d4. That's also pretty impossible because queen takes d3, making use of this pin again. Remember, pinned pieces are horrible defenders. They're not going to help much. So Schulten played king f1. And here I think Morphy unleashed a beautiful set of moves. Basically now the game is over. Black wins with precise play. Let's see if you can find the best continuation for black. Hope you found rook takes e2. After knight takes e2, now Morphy is playing with another pin. A classic case where you remove the piece that's pointing in the same line. So for example, look at this one. There is a pin, but this bishop cannot be attacked too much because that bishop will capture this bishop back. Whereas Morphy sacrifices in exchange, puts a knight there. Now you can exploit the pin, right? So this is a classic way of, sacrificing something to put a bad piece for your opponent where you can put more pressure on the pin. So knight d4, now it's basically that knight gone. Yeah, it's no white piece can actually guard the knight. The knight on e2 is dead. So White decides to run away, but now it's basically the question of finishing. Morphy is completely destroying white here, but he's also great at finishing. After king f2, follows up with a knight g4 check and king g1. And here, black to play and find a forced way to win. I hope you guys figured out the exact way to win this. When you have such amazing attacking pieces, you should always look for forcing moves. The first thing you should see is a check. I don't care if the check looks bad, look for it. It might turn out to be a really good check. And that's what happens here. It's a sacrifice. Again, a theme called square clearance. The queen wants to go to d4, but the knight's blocking. So Morphy gets rid of his own knight by just giving up knight f3 check. After pawn captures, the queen happily lands on d4. And now you can see this king is pretty much lost because only one space of king g2. Follows up with queen f2 check, king h3, queen takes f3 check, king h4. Actually here, white resigned. But let's just finish this off for fun. After king h4, I want you to try to find the best move for black. Okay, there are several winning moves. Hopefully you found a bunch of them. But the best move, I would say, is knight to f2. Because it threatens queen to g4 and queen to h3 check at the same time. So, for example, if white decides to stop queen g4 with something like this, queen h3 followed by either h6 or f6 would lead to a checkmate. So, a beautiful game by Paul Morphy. I think all of this started with the move e3. I want to go back to quickly point out, e3 was the starting point where Morphy says, I'm not getting that pawn back. I am playing for initiative. And then a couple of simple, subtle moments that I want to point out is rook e8 check, bringing the rook in, bishop g4, bringing the bishop in, and most importantly, c6. Classic Morphy style where he says, I'm not leaving the knight on b8 behind. In fact, that knight is the one, if you remember, finally won the game with knight to d4 and actually finished with a checkmate when he played knight to f3 check for a sacrifice. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this game. Again, Paul Morphy is a great example. I recommend that you study more and more of his games, particularly if you're in the early stage of your chess learning. This is fantastic. It talks about his games explain all basic important concepts. All right. Thank you for watching. Bye.